My name's David, and to tell you my story, it begins when I was married. I was in my late 30s, and we had two children. And in our late 30s, life was pretty stressful. And in the midst of the stress, she became unexpectedly pregnant. My wife was taking some medication for a potentially ulcerous condition, and it just seemed like it was just not a good time. It was inconvenient that we always wanted a third child. We thought that maybe we'd have a third child in a year or two. It happened a little too soon for us. And so she made the decision. My memory of it is that I let her make the decision. I said, I'll support whatever you want. And it was going to be a D&C. They called it a D&C procedure. And it seemed very medical. And as I look back upon it, we were in a very secular, very self-centered lifestyle. We sort of thought that life was the type of, like a car. You stopped and started it, you did what you want, you were in charge, we were in charge. We didn't have any sense there was a larger reality that we were in the midst of. We were very secular, and I had not come to God yet. So in the midst of this, she had the procedure, and the very first moment I had, the very first sense that there was a larger reality involved was I was telling a friend of mine this, and I began to cry. There are tears that come out of nowhere, and it's not explainable. There's no secular explanation for it. And I noticed this, and then after some months later, we had this really weird thing happen where she came to me just out of the blue and said, I think we would have had a girl, and I think her name would have been Amanda. Now, the thing about that is I was thinking the exact same thing. I had been thinking, I feel like this girl, it would have been a girl, and her name would have been Amanda. And we never talked about it. We didn't talk about these types of things. So those are some inklings to me that there was a larger reality at work here, something that was sort of beyond my understanding. What actually happened in our lives was that we had no second chance. Our marriage began to collapse. My personal problems surfaced. There was a lot of stress and strain in the family, and everything's disintegrated. We never had that moment of intimacy or of love again where we felt good about having a third child. We'd had our previous two children at moments of great intimacy and love. We never got that back, and we kept putting it off. We kept talking about it, but it never seemed right. It was never, quote, convenient. So in the midst of that, our lives really disintegrated. And in the midst of that, I turned to God, and I began what turned into be an interior conversion over many years that led me into joining the Catholic Church. I became full communion with the Roman Catholic world community, faith community. And my whole understanding began to change. It wasn't just a D&C, it was actually an abortion. Then I began to realize it was a death. It was the death of our child. It was the death of our third child. It was the death of my daughter. It was the death of my children's sister. A whole reality had kind of disappeared in the family. Of course, this is many years later, about 4 years ago. Now, this happened in our late 30s. 4 years ago, 25 years after this, I was seeing some literature on a Rachael's Vineyard retreat, and there was a little stirring in me. I felt something. And I thought, I've been through a lot of retreats by that point. I thought this might be a good thing to do. And so I went to it. And I have to tell you, I was a little nervous. I'm afraid of judgment. I was afraid of the Catholic pro-life movement. I had all these feelings like, I was just very hesitant about it. And this is not my world, generally. And so I went, and it was an amazing experience, utterly amazing. I never had felt so much love and compassion, so much understanding surround us. the retreat directors had also had experienced abortions. They knew exactly what it was all about. And there's two things that came out of that retreat for me, two things that happened. One was that I heard we all told our story. And the incredible thing that the actual abortion was the culmination of many years of all kinds of issues, troubled relationships, wounding experiences, dependency, wanting to please people, getting enmeshed with boyfriends who, had other ideas. In other words, there was this long history. It wasn't just an isolated event. It was kind of the natural, logical consequence of a whole series of events. And that gave me a lot of compassion and understanding. And I could see that I felt less judgmental of myself. I think that was probably it. The other thing that happened, we had this ritual where we were Lazarus in the grave. And Jesus said to us, unbind him and let him go free. Jesus said, unbind him and let him go free. And we came out of the grave. And this was the first time I had ever had the sense that there's life beyond loss. There's a life that I could be forgiven and released. And before the retreat, for many years, I had felt this pain in my body. It was like this fire in my bones. I always thought, like, this is like bone cancer. When I got really quiet and I got really spiritual, I could feel there was this burning in me. It was very painful. And it would come and it would go. After the retreat, it had gone away. This baseline pain I felt there was a calm in my bones. So I noticed that. And I'd like to say that my story ends there, but it doesn't. I had cried a lot in the retreat. There'd been this tremendous release, and I came out of feeling better. The problem is I kept it to myself. I thought that I never talk about my spirituality. I don't talk about being Catholic or my faith, especially with my children. I'm afraid of sounding like a preacher. I had this notion that this is private. They have their own spirituality. I don't want to interfere with it. I don't want to put pressure on them. So I didn't really talk to them. I didn't say anything about them. They don't even know about it. And then this spring, I was visiting my son. And he told me his girlfriend, I'd known they'd had a long relationship and the relationship was unraveling. His girlfriend had had an abortion. And I can't tell you how this hit me. I was so confronted. I hadn't been giving them privacy. I'd been keeping it a secret. All my hesitations about talking to them, I had failed as a father. Once again, because as a father, I could have given my son an alternate reality. I could have shown him if I told him just my story, I would have presented to him a larger worldview. It isn't just what we hear in the newspapers or in the secular world. There's a larger reality at stake, and I could have told him about the pain I went through and how difficult it was, and he would have maybe seen things differently. It may not have changed his choice, but I felt that I had been silent and that I had failed as a father. Once again, I had not shown him a spiritual path, and it really reminded me of my original failure as a father when I said to my wife, ex-wife now, what if I'd said to her, I want this baby. I will be here for you. I will support this. Let's do it. This will be wonderful. What if I'd said that to her instead of saying to her, well, it's your decision. Women control their own bodies. You make the decision. I wonder if she felt abandoned and alone. And I wonder if that was part of her own calculus as to why she decided for the abortion. So this reminded me that I have a role. It's not just the biologic role, it's a spiritual role of fathering. And with my ex-wife, I had a role as a husband. If I'd stood up as a husband and a father, it might have changed a lot. At least I would feel I had done my part. So every year, we have a very fractured family. We're fractured on all kinds of levels, values, and we get together for like a brunch around Christmas time. And my ex-wife says, so I always wonder, when are our children going to have children? I'm so looking forward to grandchildren. And I think, and I look, and I go, God has been giving us children. God gave us Amanda, who she'd be over 25 now. She might have had a baby by now, be a grandchild. Our son has had a grandchild. We're the ones who've said no. We're the ones who have ended these lives. And I can absorb this in my faith, in the face of God. I don't know how they would respond to this. There's something of denial that kicks in, and well, that's just your point of view. So after this whole journey I've been through, I do want to say I experience a kind of peace, but it's not the kind of peace that, it just goes away and it's forgotten about. I feel at peace with the loss, and I live with the loss. I think anybody who's lost a close family member lives with the loss. And it also is transformative. It brings me deeper into my relationship with God. It makes me more dependent on conversion and forgiveness. And it also, I think, gives me a responsibility. I think it gives me a responsibility to speak and to speak up about my truth. And I realize now I've been afraid. I've simply been afraid of alienating my friends, of changing political sides, of allying myself with all kinds of people who I would not normally have been allied with. There was a fear in me about speaking up. And even in my family, I think anybody who's had this experience, if it's just brought up in the family and discussed in the family, that in and of itself is healing. And that's a kind of culmination, that's a kind of fulfillment of this peace in me that wants to act. The peace is an energetic peace that wants to do something. So that's where I'm right now.